Hello, everybody. This is Bia Labate. I am an anthropologist and I am chief editor at Chacruna.net. And I'm here with a member of our team, Hilary Agro. She's the director manager of our social media team. And yay! We are in Atlanta, Georgia, USA. And it's my pleasure to be here in the first day of the Drug Policy Alliance conference, the Reform Conference. I have been here, my first DPA was in 2007 in New Orleans. It opened up a lot of doors for me in my life, in my worldview, and also in my career. And I'm here with Jag, who's a good friend and colleague, and he's the director of communication strategy in the DPA. And he's also somebody that has been advocating a lot to bringing the topic of psychedelics more to the central table of discussions of drug policy, something that I respect him a lot and appreciate. A lot of us appreciate him for these efforts. So he has agreed to talk a little bit to us and to our audience at Chacruna. And we would like to just thank you and maybe ask if you could start by giving us an overview of what is the DPA about and what are the main topics that are addressed in this conference.
Yeah, the Drug Policy Alliance is the largest organization in the world working to end the war on drugs and basically working to shift drug policy out of the criminal approach and into a health-based approach. So that means medical marijuana and legalizing marijuana, because that's such a huge part of the drug war. It means ending the criminalization of people who use drugs, as a number of countries like Portugal have already done. And it also means implementing health-based approaches and harm reduction approaches to drug use to reduce the harms that drugs can cause. And so the Reform Conference we put on every 2 years. It's almost like a cross between an academic conference and like a religious revival. It has a really powerful energy. There's people here from all across the world and all across the political spectrum, all across the drug policy spectrum. And it's always a really incredible experience. I appreciate so much that you're here and that you've helped me put together this psychedelics track here that I think is going to really help move a lot of conversations forward.
Yeah, it's really true. You mentioned a religious revival. You sort of get that feeling. We were just on the opening plenary, and there is that kind of energy, that kind of like strong energy and charisma present. And anthropologists have studied altered states of consciousness and have identified things like spiritual trance or use of hallucinogenic drugs or drumming or meditation or singing. But there's also other kinds of trance that could also be compared and are analogous to the psychedelic-induced trance, which is the political trance, the idea of a mass of people together, enthusiastic, with a kind of mission and a kind of view. We got a crew of people passing here, but I guess we'll continue. So this is live. Jag, can you tell us a little bit about what is the psychedelic track inside Reform and the importance of this track? And I have noticed that this is the strongest presence of psychedelics ever in the history of the Reform conferences. Can you talk to us about it?
Yeah, thank you. Well, this is my fourth time curating the psychedelics track at Reform, and I think actually it's been a similar amount of content each time. I think it just feels much more relevant.
Here we go.
All right. So yeah, everything from marijuana legalization to harm reduction and trying to bridge the gaps between those panels. So what we try to do with the psychedelics track is to bring people out of their comfort zone a bit and to push the discussion forward from what's already happening. So we have one panel that's about what do psychedelics have to do with drug policy reform. There's another panel that's about the use of psychedelics like ibogaine and also
Try your phone.
All right, we're back on. Sorry about the disconnection there. Whereas a panel that I'm most excited about deals with race and colonialism and psychedelics. There's a sort of interesting phenomenon in the psychedelics world where so much of the focus has been on research and psychedelic research and creating avenues through the medical system to get access to psychedelics. But if psychedelic therapy gets approved by the FDA in the US, that doesn't change any of the criminal laws. And so people who use psychedelics and people who are vulnerable to law enforcement will still be just as criminalized. And so I think it's really important that we look at, with any reform we're doing, who benefits from them. As we just saw in the opening plenary this morning, Michelle Alexander, author of the new Jim Crow, talking about how this country has always had a racialized system of access to drugs. And so much of the battle now with, say, marijuana legalization is not about whether marijuana gets legalized, it's how it gets done. That's why with Proposition 64 in California last year, which we drafted and funded and ran the campaign for, we prioritized racial justice, where there's reparations in the law itself to communities of color who have been most harmed by the war on drugs, where the tax revenue gets reinvested in those communities, where people with previous convictions can participate in the legal market. And there's a number of other provisions like that. And all our, we're starting marijuana legalization campaigns in New York, New Jersey, a number of other states now that really center race. And I think that's a really important discussion that needs to be had more in the psychedelics community, because it's very easy to see a world 10 years from now where psychedelic therapy gets legalized, which would be fantastic and alleviate enormous human suffering. But when something is only accessible through the medical system, it means it's only accessible to a certain group of people and people with more access to resources. And so what we're trying to do at DPA when it comes to psychedelics is building out a complementary approach to the medicalization of psychedelics that also focuses on reducing the harms of prohibition. And we actually, that might sound very theoretical or lofty, but we're actually already doing that in a lot of ways and very close in a lot of places in the US to really ending the criminalization of psychedelics and other drugs. That's going forward the next few years at the Drug Policy Alliance. Our really main priority is popularizing and mainstreaming decriminalization in the US of all drugs. And that would have enormous implications for people who use psychedelics. In places like Portugal, where drugs are decriminalized, they're able to do drug checking. People who use psychedelics are able to be much more open about it. And people who have problems are much more able to get help. So I think it's, this is a chance to kind of move that discussion forward, which is exciting.
Thank you, Jag. So just to understand better your position and the DPA's, how would a post-prohibitionist world look like in regards to psychedelics? When you say decriminalized, are you just saying people won't go to jail, or do you actually need to have certain parameters under which that use is done? Because we know that substances like ayahuasca or LSD or psilocybin or ibogaine and all the other, kinship family of substances, they are pretty strong and they can be dangerous. And it's maybe not correct for everybody always in all contexts. So do you envision some kind of control, or how have you gone that far in your line of thought?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, when it comes to the politics of it right now, whereas decriminalization and ending arrests of people simply for using drugs or possessing a small amount has high political support, fully legally regulating drugs and creating systems of access with things like psychedelic support is still really low. So in terms of like what's on the table in terms of legislation right now, that's not happening. But what we're trying to do is to put those models in place, because every drug is different and every drug will require different models of regulation, different models of community regulation. But I think our fundamental principle that we always come back to is that no one deserves to be put into the criminal justice system and to lose their freedom simply for using any drug, and that's just not effective, whether it's heroin or whether it's ayahuasca. And it's important to, and by decriminalizing drugs, it also makes it easier for people to get access to information where they can get to, and it helps support groups that do it in an organized way where they're able to be more open about it. They're not having to worry about the stigma of having to share information. And ultimately, yeah, we do need to move towards a world where we have a system of legal regulation for psychedelics. That's like the obvious solution. And yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about here.
Well, thank you so much. We at Chacruna.net are completely identified with this mission, and we strongly believe that sharing information and education is fundamental to raising this movement, to spreading it, to making it more sustainable. What we're trying to do in Chacruna.net is exactly to kind of make academic knowledge that is sometimes rather obscure, hermetic, and hard to find and hard to read and hard to understand, translate that package into more accessible website articles that are short. Phone, maybe it's better, no?
Okay.
So yeah, to sum up, we at Chacruna are trying to bring out this information that, translate academic knowledge into short articles, but also have the conversations that sometimes don't happen in academic conferences and don't happen at all in academic papers, but happen on the hallways of conferences like this, which are the real dilemmas and the challenges that people in the movement face, and people that are working with drug policy or psychedelic science, ethical questions, personal questions, existential questions, questions of how to act politically. We want to bring those questions to the debate in short articles and short interviews. We're also starting a new phase in Chacruna. We're going to be launching some new other projects. So I'm happy that you're watching us, and keep tuned. We're going to be shooting a live here. And thanks, Hillary, and all the social media team of Chacruna. Thanks, Jag.
Thank you, Bia. Thank you, Chacruna.